Histograms are a fantastic way to present data that can be organized into intervals. A histogram is a vertical bar graph. The intervals are represented by the width of each bar. Since all intervals should be the same size, all of the bars on your graph should also be the same size. As one interval ends, the next interval begins, so all of the bars should be touching one another. Before creating our histogram, we must first organize our data by constructing a frequency table. Here you can see that the class test scores can be grouped into intervals. Each interval is the same size. As we learned prior, we are going to mark off each of our test scores, tallying it within its corresponding interval, and totaling the tallies in the frequency column. Although this may be time-consuming, you can see that it will be helpful when we construct our histogram. After we complete our frequency table, we are going to utilize our interval as our horizontal axis for our histogram and our frequency as our vertical axis for our histogram. We have 32 test scores, and we have a total frequency of 32, which means we did not miss any data. We will now utilize the information that we've compiled from our frequency table into our histogram. Notice our horizontal axis are our test scores, and our vertical axis is the frequency. Every single histogram must have a title. You want to make sure that your title is descriptive of the information or data that you are going to be presenting in your frequency histogram. Our first interval is 41 to 50. Because our interval does not begin at 0, we need to use a break mark between the 0 and the 41, signifying we're skipping over multiple intervals between 0 and 41. All of the intervals are the same size. They do not overlap. Because the intervals are the same size, all of the bars must also be the same size. Because as one interval begins, the next one is ending, you need to assure that all of your bars are touching. Something to assist you in assuring that all of your intervals are the same size are a grid. The interval 41 to 50 contains 3 values from the test scores that fit into this interval. So we will record a bar 3 high for the frequency over top of our interval. In the interval 51 to 60, there are 0 pieces of data that fit into that interval. So we will not be recording any information. For 61 to 70, there are 4 scores that fit into that interval, so our bar will reach up to the 4 mark. Our next interval is 71 to 80, so because there are 11 scores in that interval, we will make sure that our bar reaches the 11 mark. Each of these bars are 2 boxes wide. Again, you want to make sure that your intervals are the same size, both as a bar and as numerical values, and you want to assure that all of the bars are touching. It may be deceiving because there's nothing drawn here, but that line would be at 0, which is the bottom of our grid. So we're going to continue. We're going to record 81 to 90 with 8 values, and we're going to record our 90 to 100 with 6 values. Now that we have our frequency histogram, I want to point out a few things. You always want to label your vertical scale from 0 to at least 1 more than the highest number of the frequency. You always want to label and title your axes as well as your entire graph. You also want to label your intervals on the horizontal scale. If your interval does not begin with 0, You want to assure that you are using a break mark.